Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever felt like your life is on this strange, winding path filled with detours, silence, and waiting? Like no matter how much effort you put in, the pieces just don't seem to connect? What if I told you that that's not random, that your life is moving with intention, even in its most silent moments? Walk the path no one understands. There's something profoundly uncomfortable about walking a road others don't see. We're wired for connection, for affirmation, for companionship on the journey. And yet some of the most purpose-driven lives, just like Hebrew prophecies, are marked by seasons of isolation, misunderstanding, and even rejection. It's not because those lives are flawed. It's because they are ahead. Every prophet in the Hebrew scriptures knew this reality intimately. They were never voted most popular. In fact, many were ridiculed, abandoned, even imprisoned, not because they were wrong, but because they were right too soon. Their lives were aligned with a vision the present couldn't comprehend. That's exactly what it feels like when you're carrying something bigger than yourself. Most people want clarity, but if you've ever carried a vision, a divine sense of destiny or calling, you know that clarity doesn't always come first. Often the vision shows up in fragments, in whispers and quiet convictions. You know something has shifted, you feel called in a direction that doesn't make logical sense. And when you try to explain it to others, their eyes glaze over, they nod politely, but silently question your sanity. That's the path of the prophet. And if that's where you are right now, welcome to the club. We see this in the life of Noah. Think about it. He built a massive ark on dry ground with no storm in sight. He obeyed a word from God that made no logical sense. People mocked him, laughed at him, doubted him, and yet he kept building. Why? Because Noah understood something vital. When the instruction is divine, the validation doesn't have to be public. When the calling is real, you don't need consensus to keep walking. You just need courage. And here's the thing about courage. It rarely feels heroic in the moment. Most of the time, it feels lonely. Courage feels like showing up to build when no one else is watching. Courage feels like walking away from what's familiar without a guarantee of what's next. Courage feels like standing still in your conviction when the crowd moves in another direction. You might be tempted to believe that if no one understands your path, you must be doing something wrong. But what if the very misunderstanding is the evidence that you're doing something right? The deeper your calling, the narrower your road. And the narrower your road, the fewer people will be able to walk it with you. The Hebrew prophets understood this long before we did. They were just messengers. They were models. Their lives weren't merely about delivering a word. They were the word. Their very existence became the message. That's what you're doing when you walk the path no one understands. You're becoming a living message. You're building something for a future moment, a future generation, a future reality that hasn't caught up with your faith yet. So you keep walking. Not because they understand, but because you believe. You believe in the voice that spoke to you. You believe in the direction that was whispered in your soul. And you believe that obedience is worth more than applause. This path isn't easy, but it is exact. It's divinely tailored for who you are and what you carry. It's not meant to be popular, it's meant to be prophetic. Speak what's inside of you even if no one claps. There is something deeply human about our desire to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be affirmed. From childhood, we learn to speak and instinctively search for the reaction. We look for the smile, the nod, the applause. But here's the truth that every purpose-driven person must confront at some point. The deeper your message, the smaller your audience may be at first. And yet, you still must speak. The Hebrew prophets didn't have stadiums filled with fans. Their audiences were often resistant, rebellious, even hostile. They weren't clapped for. They were cried over. They weren't celebrated. They were silenced. And still, they spoke. Why? Because what was in them was too heavy to carry in silence. It wasn't about popularity. It was about obedience. It was about alignment. And that same burden, that same inner fire is in you. You know, that idea, that message, that truth, that won't leave you alone. It wakes you up at night. It stirs in you when you're in the shower or sitting in traffic or walking alone. It's not just a thought, it's a calling. It's a divine assignment wrapped in your personality, shaped by your experience and embedded in your spirit. And every time you try to bury it under logic, fear, or convenience, it comes back stronger. As a reason for that, you were not created to carry this truth in silence. You were designed to deliver it. You were chosen to release it. Because someone, somewhere, is waiting to hear the exact sound of your voice, your cadence, your vocabulary, your story. The way it flows from you cannot be duplicated by anyone else. That's why suppression feels like suffering. You were not made to contain the message. You were made to communicate it. But here's the dilemma. We want to speak boldly, but we also want the world to approve of what we say. We want to be authentic, but we crave applause. And when the applause doesn't come, we start to question whether the message matters. But this is where we have to mature into a prophetic mindset, because the applause isn't the assignment, the truth is. And sometimes your truth will offend people before it frees them. Jeremiah said, "Your word is like a fire shut up in my bones. I'm weary of holding it in." That's what it feels like when you're sitting on a message that you're too afraid to say. It burns. It eats away at you. Because it's not meant to stay inside. You were not built for silence. You were built for sound. Prophetic voices are not defined by volume. They're defined by alignment. The goal isn't to be loud. The goal is to be true. You may not have a platform. You may not have a microphone. But if you have breath, you have a voice. And your voice, when rooted in truth, has power. Power to shake rooms. Power to shift atmospheres. Power to awaken people who didn't even know they were asleep. That's the kind of impact you were designed to have. But you can't access that impact until you make peace with being misunderstood, until you let go of needing to be clapped for and step into the raw, sometimes uncomfortable truth of who you are and what you carry. Because in the end, your words are not for everyone, but they are for someone. And that someone may be silently drowning in doubt, in fear, in confusion, waiting for someone brave enough to say what no one else will. That someone might be you a few years ago. That someone might be your future self, or your children, or a stranger across the world. You may never know who you impact, but you will know the weight that lifts when you finally speak. So speak not for applause, but for alignment. Speak not for validation, but for obedience. Speak not because everyone will understand, but because you finally do. Wait for the fulfillment, even if it takes years. Now, the hardest parts of walking in purpose is the waiting. Not the passive kind of waiting we experience in line at a coffee shop, but the soul-deep, uncertain waiting that comes after you've obeyed, after you've spoken, after you've risked, and nothing seems to happen. That kind of waiting tests everything in you, your patience, your belief, your identity. And yet, it is in that waiting that the most powerful parts of your story are formed. Hebrew prophecy was never immediate. When the prophets spoke, the fulfillment rarely arrived the next day or even the next year. Some prophecies took decades. Others are still unfolding. The time between the message and the manifestation wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. Purpose has timing, and timing isn't based on our convenience. It's based on alignment. You can be right and still be early. You can be anointed and still have to wait. We live in a culture that confuses speed with success. We want quick results, immediate applause, fast growth. But divine purpose doesn't follow cultural timelines. It follows eternal ones. And that means you may plant seeds now that don't bear fruit until years from today. You may speak words that won't be understood until someone is ready to hear them. You may walk in circles like the Israelites, wondering why it's taking so long, only to discover later that the delay was protecting you, shaping you, preparing you. Waiting doesn't mean you're stuck. Waiting means you're being processed. And the process is never wasted. Think of it this way. The longer something is in development, the more powerful it usually becomes. Fast food is quick, but it's not nourishing. A gourmet meal takes time. A skyscraper takes longer to build than a shed. The same is true for your purpose. If it's taking longer, it's probably because what you're carrying is bigger. Think about Abraham. He was given a promise, descendants like the stars, but then silence. Years of it. No child, no sign, just a promise hanging in the air while his faith was tested over and over. And when the fulfillment finally came, it wasn't just about a baby. It was about legacy, about nations, about a lineage that would stretch into eternity. That's the kind of promise that takes time. That's the kind of fulfillment that's worth waiting for. In the waiting, your character is being strengthened. Your endurance is being refined. Your faith is being made real, not just theoretical. Because faith that never has to wait is just optimism. But faith that can sit in the unknown, that can stand firm in the silence, that can trust when the timeline has fallen apart, that's faith that's been tested. That's faith that can move mountains. And here's something powerful. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean movement isn't happening. Purpose often grows underground. Roots spread before branches appear. The foundation is laid before the house is ever seen. That's what waiting does. It builds the unseen strength that will hold up the visible promise. If God gave you the fulfillment without the foundation, it would crush you. So the waiting isn't a delay, it's a mercy. While you're waiting, you're not wasting time. You're becoming time. You are becoming the very space where purpose is shaped and released. You're becoming more focused, more surrendered, more in tune with the mission that's bigger than you. You start to realize it was never just about the outcome. It was about who you became in the waiting. So don't rush the process. Don't resent the quiet seasons. Don't confuse stillness with stagnation. Because when your life is like a Hebrew prophecy, you live by a different rhythm. You walk by a different clock. And the fulfillment, when it comes, will not only make sense of the wait, it will make the wait worth it. Let your life become the message. There comes a point in your journey where words are no longer enough, where the things you say, no matter how true, must be backed by something deeper. That's when your life becomes the message. Not just your beliefs, not just your speeches, not just the dreams you post about or the goals you write down. Your actual life, the way you live, the way you love, the way you stand. It all becomes the echo of something far greater than you. When we look at the Hebrew prophets, what stands out most isn't just what they said, it's what they lived. Their lives were often uncomfortable, symbolic, even strange, but they weren't performative. They were intentional. Hosea married someone who would break his heart, not for drama, but for demonstration. Isaiah walked barefoot and stripped as a sign to the nation. Ezekiel lay on his side for over a year to reflect the burden of Israel's guilt. None of that made logical sense, but it made prophetic sense, because their lives were not about appearances. They were about alignment. We live in a time where branding is louder than integrity, where people are told to curate their lives instead of live them. But when you are walking in divine purpose, your power doesn't come from your polish, it comes from your presence. It comes from the consistency between what you say and how you live. That's the difference between charisma and character. Charisma can attract a crowd, but character builds something that lasts. And the people who change the world don't just have good ideas, they have lives that reinforce those ideas day in and day out. To let your life become the message is to accept that every choice speaks. Every decision you make, every action you take, every step you walk when no one is watching, that's the real sermon. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent. It's about being whole. It's about letting your inner convictions shape your outer expression, not just on a stage, not just when it's convenient, but every single day. When you live this way, people might not always understand you, but they will respect you. Because authenticity is magnetic. Even those who disagree with your message will be drawn to your integrity. They'll sense something uncommon, something real. That's how the prophets made their impact. They didn't need everyone to agree with them. They needed their lives to align with the truth they carried. They knew that the most powerful messages are lived, not just spoken. Think about how different the world would be if more people let their lives be their loudest testimony. Not louder posts, not fancier language, but deeper authenticity. What if your life could become the evidence that God is real, that purpose matters, that conviction is still alive, that peace is possible, that faith can survive the fire? That's not a fantasy. That's what happens when you commit to living in such a way that even your silence speaks. You don't need a platform to live prophetically. You don't need a stage to make your life count. The way you treat your family, the way you handle money, the way you respond to hardship, the way you forgive, the way you wait, the way you lead with humility and love, that is your message. That is what the world sees. That is what people will remember. And more than anything, that is what will leave a legacy. The greatest impact you will make won't come from the moments you go viral. It will come from the moments you stay true. When you live your values instead of just reciting them. When your integrity outshines your image. When your life becomes such a clear reflection of your purpose that even your pain becomes prophetic. That's when you stop trying to make a point and start making a difference. That's when your life is the message. Endure being misunderstood. There's a moment in every purpose-driven life when the silence from others becomes louder than applause ever could. That moment when people stop nodding, when the crowd steps back, when your phone stops ringing, when even the people you thought would stand with you start to question you. That moment can feel devastating unless you understand that misunderstanding is not the enemy of purpose. It's the evidence of it. Every great leader, every prophet, every person who dared to live differently has had to walk through the fire of being misunderstood. It is not a detour. It is the path. The Hebrew prophets didn't just deliver uncomfortable messages. They became uncomfortable people. And the world rarely embraces what it doesn't understand. Jeremiah was accused of being unpatriotic. Elijah was hunted like a criminal. Jesus, perfect, loving, pure, was despised by the very people he came to save. The common thread? None of them were wrong. They were just ahead of their time. Being misunderstood is one of the most painful parts of walking in alignment. It touches your deepest need to belong, to be seen, to be heard. And yet, the people who endure misunderstanding without losing themselves are the ones who leave the greatest legacy, because they're not living for approval, they're living for assignment. They're not moved by consensus, they're grounded in conviction. And that kind of life shakes the world. You will be called arrogant when you're actually confident. You will be labeled stubborn when you're actually standing in truth. You will be seen as difficult when you're simply discerning. You will be called too much when, in fact, you're just no longer willing to play small. And every time someone gets you wrong, it will sting. But that sting is not your signal to stop. It's your reminder that you're in rare territory. Not everyone is meant to understand your journey, because not everyone was called to walk it. And when you stop trying to translate your truth into a version people will applaud, you gain something priceless. Freedom. Freedom to be who you really are. Freedom to speak what you really know. Freedom to stand even when you're standing alone. The ones who misunderstand you now might be the same ones who will one day thank you for not giving up. And even if they never do, that's okay, because your purpose was never about being seen. It was always about being sent. There will be seasons where your silence is misread as weakness. Your humility is mistaken for insecurity. Your kindness is mistaken for naivety. And yet, you'll keep going, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Because something in you knows that your job is not to be understood, but to be obedient. That's the prophetic life. That's the cost of being ahead. And in time, the same people who misunderstood you might look back and see the wisdom they missed. But by then, you'll be too busy walking in fulfillment to need their applause. So endure it. Endure the side eyes, the whispers, the distance, the doubt. Endure being the misunderstood one. Because it means you're standing for something rare. It means you're living like a prophecy, clear, bold, and just a little too soon for most to recognize.